All right, everybody, next step. Now that we've established and set up our organizational line drawing, we did a little bit of citing. Now we need to go a little bit deeper and make sure that everything is correct as we start to make this look a little bit more like this. So of course, first and foremost, remember, no matter what object you're drawing, whether your master drawing is of a human form, whether it's a landscape, architecture, whether it's still life, you do need to kind of observe those relative proportions. Remember, first observe, is your object taller than it is wider, at least in this case? Then, of course, figure out, okay, where are the different components and how do they compare to one another in terms of their size? That's what we did previously. And then, of course, remember, relative proportions are just part of the puzzle. You need to make sure that their tilts, that their angles are looking good. So cite those areas and correct those first before you start to add in all the little details, all the little nuggets, all the hatching, the shadowing, the smudging that you may see in your pieces. Again, some of you guys may be doing just pure line drawings, in which case that's great. Just keep on going with the line. But of course, remember the principle is the same. Don't go in with details too early until you've been sure to establish not only a correct, but also a solid foundation. So before we start to get in and do these outer contours, remember, look to your source image because that is going to be what you're basing everything off of. Just like how with our still life drawings in the studio, we paid attention and we really looked at the objects in front of us. You want to really look at the drawing in front of you, whether it's in a book, on your phone, on a computer. Really look and observe again the nuances because again that'll give you kind of a clue as to how to proceed onward once you have this big sloppy sketch, how to make this kind of come together. Where should we measure next? Where should we start to make our marks? When I look at this particular piece, I can see a lot of the details, a lot of the nuance of this piece lies in the outer contours. You can see how we have very slight fluctuations, very slight dips, curves, thickening of lines, thinning out of lines. So we need to make sure that we observe where things change direction, where things get darker, where things stay lighter. And that's what we're going to emulate on our page. If I just went and I made a big dark outline or an outline that was all the same around each of my legs, that's not what I see in front of me here. So remember, always look to your source. That is going to be the telling and the defining force. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to clean up a little bit because some of these lines are a little bit distracting. Some of you guys may want to do this when you are kind of transitioning between your organizational line drawing, preliminary citing, into the more hardcore citing. I'm kind of getting rid of, I'm using my gum eraser because I know that I don't want to rip my paper. If all you have is the little pink eraser at the end of a number 2 pencil, that's still going to get the job done. If you do have your hard and soft erasers, you can definitely pull those out. But either way, you need some sort of way of getting rid of what was on the page because again, we do have a little bit of a mess. So now that we've gotten rid of a lot of those really sloppy gestural lines that serve their purpose, but we don't really need them anymore, now we can go in and start to really kind of make this thing sing, right? So first I need to figure out exactly what's going on up here because this is going to help to anchor my legs, right? And of course, this is something we can observe knowing what we know about real life, right? The hips, the pelvis, that's a very important force in our subject matter here. So here I can see that obviously my model's right leg is on top of the left leg. So I need to make sure that I kind of emulate that here because right now you can see how we have the legs kind of in equal parts. So I'm going to make sure that this chunk of leg is really taking up all the space. So of course I'm probably going to want to come in here and I'm just going to kind of make just a darker line. I'm keeping it a little bit light, but I did want to make sure that I note that because that's an important detail that we definitely don't want to miss. Additionally, we need to check the width of this thigh before I start to darken this line here, right? So you need to figure out what you want to use as a unit of measure. If I wanted to use my foot as a unit of measure, that's kind of a nice little chunk of information that we can use. We can say, okay, how many feet wide are my thighs, right? So let's check with our source image first. So we see, here's our foot. Let's measure 1.5, right? If you wanted to use your pencil to measure, you could do that as well. And again, since it's my book, I can draw in it if I wanted to. Some students like to print out their source image and have it next to them so they can write it on top of it and stuff. You don't have to do that. But if you do have a printer, sometimes that can be a nice thing so that you can actually touch it and feel it. But if you're using a screen, if you're kind of pinching and zooming, you can still do what I'm doing here. So we said 1.5 feet wide. So let's get our foot on here. I'll use my pencil. Right. So we've got 1.5. So we're a little wider than I thought, which is cool. It's kind of fun when we're able to kind of bulk this thing up, right? So then I can refine this guy and bring this down, right? So next what I need to do is I need to figure out, okay, did I get the width of this correct? So again, we can kind of use this guy to measure, right? This leg is going to be thicker because again, this is covering up this one. So again, we can kind of go here. Looking pretty good there, not too bad. Again, this guy looks a bit bulbous right now because I do have to kind of refine the height, refine the shape and stuff like that. But right now we're just checking our widths too because we checked our heights. Now it's time to check our widths. So again, just kind of guessing, making a generalized statement down here. And I can start to guess, right? I can say, okay, here's my calf bulge, got my ankle here, and then of course my foot. And I'm not really sure what that's doing, but we will measure it, right? So again, now we can start to see this thing's starting to come together, right? Again, this may seem like, oh, it's taking a while, but of course, that's kind of the point, right? Is the idea that these things take time and we want to make sure that we get them right. Because again, we are studying, we are placing ourselves in the shoes of a different artist to learn more about ourselves. Right? So again, I want to make sure that this little crease, this little crook of the back of the knee is at the correct height. Even though we measured it earlier, we do want to double check because this is going to be an important area. It's kind of the centerpiece, sort of one of the main focal points of this particular drawing. So again, here I can use a plumb line, and the idea of plumb lines, if you remember from our sighting adventures, is the idea if we draw an imaginary horizontal or vertical line, we can establish kind of landmarks. So if I were to do kind of a horizontal line here, I can see that it kind of reaches sort of that top shadow of my knee, which in this case is good. We want to make sure we didn't accidentally make these knees equal out in terms of their relative height. So that's good. We're on a good path. And of course we can see, okay, that guy here does bottom bulge. So again, use what you have in front of you to establish those proportional relationships and to make sure you know what's going on, right? So again, I'm just refining, kind of figuring out what's going on, working from general to specific, right? And of course, if I'm saying, oh wow, awkward, it's kind of because it is, we can definitely check the different angles for things, right? We can say, okay, here is the angle of my thigh. So again, my calf rather. You can kind of scooch that in, right? Again, we can also look at the negative space, right? I can see that I have a bit more space in between here, so I definitely need to rework what I got going on here. And it looks like this leg's going to need to be a little bit longer, but we'll fix that in just a second. But remember, it's all about fixing, adjusting, always changing and adjusting yourself. Again, it could be easy just to say, oh, close enough, and just continue onward. But remember, we don't really want to do that, right? We want to make sure that our drawing looks like our other drawing, right? And of course, hopefully some of this sighting process will be a little bit faster than what we do in real life because our piece is already flat. We're not dealing with a three-dimensional form. We're dealing with 2D to 2D. So hopefully that will kind of help some of you guys when it comes to kind of figuring out what to do in terms of dimension, maybe some of those tricky situations such as foreshortening, those things have already been flattened for you. All you have to do is make sure that you're holding yourself accountable and that you are drawing exactly what you see in front of you, right? So let's see here, we got a slight bulge of that foot coming down. And then of course, since this foot is kind of coming towards us, sort of angled out towards the front, I definitely kind of want to note that, right? And just a big sloppy shape will do, right? And again, I will need to kind of figure out the angle of this guy versus the shin, right? But I'll continue to work on that and that'll come together more as I am, again, add value and stuff like that. Again, for those of you guys that pick master drawings that include human forms, remember a lot of human forms when it comes to drawing, a lot of those features really come through when you add shading and when you add those finishing details. So if it does look a little bit funky, if it looks a little bit off, weird, awkward, make sure you trust what you see in front of you. And as you add in those little details later, that's when everything will come together, especially for softer bits, things such as, the nose, the ears, stuff where there's a lot of soft cartilage and things like that. For those of you guys that are picking perhaps some portraits or things like that, you might be encountering that as well. So let's go ahead and kind of figure out what's going on with our feet down here, because it looks like I kind of made this a little bit shorter than what it has to be. So let's go ahead and see, okay, if I draw here, here you can see my big toe certainly does not line up with my ankle bone. So I do need to elongate this guy, right? So just a little bit longer. So again, make sure that you note these things. Good thing I caught this early on before I started to add in all my details. Otherwise, that would have been a sad time. So let's go ahead and finish this guy. The chair is squeaking. So of course, then I can see, okay, now I know why this was looking awkward, because I was shortening. Right? So now I have, doing a little bit of sighting, I can see this little bulge where my calf pops out. It's right above that little ankle. Is right here. Popped out. Kind of goes in a little bit. And if I'm not sure of that angle, again, I can check it because I have my source image right in front of me. Unlike with your still lives, your drawing won't it won't get mad if you get up close to it, right? So, again, figuring out this outer contour. Looks a little more statuesque, a little more graceful. And then, of course, we'll figure out the details of this foot later. Again, I'm just making kind of a big shape just to, again, show us that we're on the right path. Right? Again, start with a general shape, especially if we're doing something difficult, for example, such as a foot, a very challenging thing for many a student. But of course, we want to start off general. So again, just showing you all these general shapes. Right? So now we're working our way towards greater specificity. I am going to ground my form because right now my legs look like they're doing sort of a dance in space. So you can see that Pontormo added a little ground line down here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to add a little ground line. I'm going to make it as long as his, right? And it kind of goes towards, so make a line down here, it goes here. Again, don't add things that your artist didn't, right? If you don't like what they did, perhaps pick a different drawing, right? Or just say, maybe for my own pieces, I won't do that. Hopefully, as you're going through this process, you're kind of, again, like I said, putting yourselves in the shoe of another artist, right? The idea that we can learn a lot, like I mentioned, from the idea of another artist, right? So this little guy comes down here. We do have kind of a weird ball thing that Pontormo drew for this particular study. So I can indicate that here. Right? It's a little light, you can't really see it too well here, but again, we can kind of check that out. All right. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to continue to clean up, and I'm going to continue to, again, do some measuring and make sure that everything's good as I'm starting to round out my bases. So again, I'm still citing, but as I'm citing, I'm cleaning up, I'm refining, and of course, remember, try to avoid, at least in my case, for example, try to avoid adding in the shadows, adding in the little details until you've established everybody in terms of their proportions, in terms of thickness. I still need to check the thickness of this particular leg because right now that's looking a little scrawny, which no judgment, but that's not what we see here. So I'll be doing that next. So again, the next couple minutes, I'll just be showing you guys an example of what it looks like to continue to cite. Remember, you have your source image here. Try your best to emulate what's happening here. And that might take a little bit of extra citing for some of you guys. So don't be afraid to really get in there and make sure that everything is exactly correct. Again, some of these really fine details, some of those nuances are really going to help this drawing be a truly great study. Again, when we look at these study drawings, we should be able to say, wow, you did a really great job sort of stepping into the shoes of your artist and being able to do some of the things that they were doing. So again, like we said, I don't expect you guys to in my case, I'm not going to draw like Pontormo for the rest of my life, but I can take what I've learned here and apply this to my other works. I can see what I want to try in my own pieces, what I don't want to try. So again, using the process that we've done already for new subjects, right? So otherwise, we're going to continue onward for sighting.